This conference is now being recorded.
Welcome to the New York State ASBO webinar, Budget Planning for the Future. My name is Matthew Darius. I am the Senior Staff Associate for Professional Development here at New York ASBO, and I will be moderating today's call. Your speaker for today's program is Mike Sanangelo. Operator assistance is available anytime during this conference by pressing £0. You may send chat questions at any time during the presentation using the chat window, which is indicated by a speech bubble icon towards the right of the presentation. I will now turn the call over to our speaker. Mike, please begin.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back if you've been here for the other presentations that we've had on the budgeting and financial planning. Otherwise, welcome for the first time if this is your first time checking out the webinar. Again, the topic today is long-term planning, a very important topic. It's the part 4, actually, of the 4-part series. We will pick up with part 1 of the series in a couple of weeks, and I'm sure Matthew will have some date or information for you on that. But we want to begin by looking at some of the issues and concepts in long-term planning. Again, I know that some of you have signed up for all 4 of the presentations, and therefore there may be a certain amount of repetition, because I also know that there are some folks that have tuned in for the first time, and so I need to give them information maybe that they didn't have before, but hopefully the duplication will be at a minimum. And again, the attempt here is to try to synthesize information that is available out there on the website in various sources, also to give you some of my information and experience over the course of several years in school business. And so I hope we put together a package here that will be very useful for you in your career. Again, we're talking about long-term planning. It is absolutely essential for long-term planning in a school district to maintain sustainability and resiliency. And as we go through the webinar, I will attempt to define those terms, but for now, if you would just accept that notion that long-term planning is absolutely vital. And why is it vital? Well, several reasons. First of all, we are experiencing in school districts some of the probably the worst fiscal distress that we have seen in many years. Certainly over the course in excess of 25 years that I have been in the school business field, this is probably and has been and will continue, it looks like, to be one of the worst times as far as the economic distress that the state and nation seems to be experiencing right now. We have had several, as you probably have seen even maybe in your school district, demographic shifts in our population. Certainly the population is aging, and all of these elements make it absolutely essential that you plan for the future. And if probably we've done anything that we haven't done anything that we should have in the past, is that we need to emphasize more on long-term planning. I think because of the notion that budgets are required, as we've talked about, we need to look at long-term planning. It is the only way, from a financial point of view, that we as school business officials can help our districts weather some of the storms that we are facing now. There are other reasons and needs that have occurred. I'm sure you could list many of them. Certainly English as a second language, we've seen immense increase in student population there. And just the overall accountability, globalization that is being experienced, where the United States certainly is competing with many other countries to have students excel in standards. So there's a host of reasons why it makes good sense to look at the planning, to look at the forecast and the future, and try to estimate what our long-term goals may be. The next slide is attempting to show the relationship of what we will speak about today in terms of the budget. And again, the budget, as it can be defined narrowly, I would say, is really a very short-term type of approach. And the aspects that we will look at today, the planning, whether it be, I have them listed here, strategic planning, the long-term planning, technology planning, and capital planning, all feed into for information that you need on an ongoing basis to prepare your school budget. Certainly the school budget also feeds the long-term plans, and so there is this cyclical approach where everything kind of meshes together, and one requires the other. So we want to show that there is this relationship, and that by using long-term planning, you certainly can use that information and should use that information to put together your regular operating school budget. Now, sometimes when we think of long-term planning, we are thinking about trying to estimate what our revenues will be and what our expenditures will be for the future. But I hope what we will see today is that that is not sufficient. It is not enough to merely look at the revenues and expenditures. We need to look at the educational side also. And as we've talked about in the other webinars, we need to look at and be concerned about what our mission is in the school district, and base our long-term plans on the mission. So not only do we want to look at the revenue and expenditures, but we also need to define the educational needs for our school district. And the attempt here is to try to stabilize the educational program over a longer period of time. Certainly we do that on an annual basis when we look at our budget, but we want to look out into the several years and try to estimate exactly what our needs, requirements may be in the future also. So what is planning? It's a long-term perspective. It is certainly a practice that has been recommended by the Government Finance Officers Association. There has been much written on long-term planning by the GFOA. Most schools are using some form, I think, of long-term planning, and most of the time it is strategic planning. As I mentioned in the past, strategic planning is just one approach to planning. You don't necessarily have to use that approach. There certainly are other approaches, and again, there is a New York State ASBO webinar on organization and administration where last year Peter Weber, another assistant superintendent for business, and I put together a series of webinars, one of them being on the whole planning topic. So if it's of interest to you, you may want to get a hold of that. Some of that information, by the way, we will look at in this webinar also, just to get a foundation for proceeding with some other definitions. The definition of planning, there can be several, but planning consists of defining the important objectives a school district needs to achieve. And most of the time we can bring that back to student-centered type of objectives. Certainly that should be the central focus. There are other aspects, obviously, to be concerned with, but certainly student achievement is central to our mission. Strategic planning sets the direction of a school district with the goal of improving its prospects for long-term survival and prosperity. Again, we'll go back to those terms that I mentioned, sustainability and resiliency. The long-term process helps in all of those regards. And it's necessary to plan ahead to try to avoid any sort of disaster, at least to try to look at the future and come up with possible areas of concern where disaster may be pending. So we want to take a look. Those are some definitions. Again, there are other definitions that you can probably find out there if you so choose. What is planning all about? Well, it's organizational learning. We try with planning to create a situation where the organization is somewhat flexible, adaptable, creative, capable of looking at new approaches and effectively synergizing those aspects into one, and capable of improving. So there's a learning that occurs as we go through the process of planning. Again, the process of planning can be as important as the actual end product that will be arrived from it. But certainly, these are some of the ideas, concepts that we want to experience as we go through this process of planning. As I mentioned, there are several types of planning. Some of the buzzwords are comprehensive planning, the long-range planning, program planning, project planning. There are many others also. But most of them deal with shorter range types of plans. What we want to look at and concentrate on today is more of a long-term plan, a strategic plan, if you will, and a long-term financial plan that goes hand in hand. Hopefully, we'll be able to show how many aspects of a strategic plan are also the same aspects of a long-term financial plan. Usually, again, the operational planning is for a year or less. That is something that is ongoing. I'm sure you are very involved with operational planning. Certainly the budget approach that many of us have taken in the past is more of an operational type of plan. But we want to make it strategic. We want to show that it's a long-term plan and that there are aspects of that can help us for the future. So one approach in trying to define what a strategic plan is to identify any gaps that occur in any of these areas: performance, service, achievement, and the one that we want to focus on mainly today is finance. We'll see that if there is a gap, once we have gone through our process and procedure of long-term planning, if there is this gap in finances, then we need to deal with that. And we will see some of a paradigm for dealing with that. And we have to recognize sometimes that these gaps are opportunities to improve performance. Certainly, if we don't know the gaps could exist, then chances are we can't go forward with the planning process and trying to understand and make improvements. And so it's very important that we look at strategic planning as a beginning, and then from there try to determine what the gaps are. Now, there are other gaps that can occur, certainly besides financial, and I've listed them here: performance gaps. Certainly by strategic planning, we may see that student performance is lacking to what our ideal state might be, and so there would be a gap there between what we want to have occur and what actually will occur, at least according to our planning process. So again, we want to focus on the finance, obviously, but certainly recognize that there are other opportunities to determine gaps in other areas as you go through the process. The next slide shows you what I've tried to do here is compare what strategic planning is and what long-term financial planning is. And again, they go hand in hand. one feeds off the other. There is this approach that we need both aspects. We need a strategic plan, but we also need the long-term financial plan that goes with it. And so I've listed here some of the concepts that usually go along with strategic planning, like defining the purpose and communicating goals. It certainly gives a sense of ownership because typically you'll have many stakeholders involved, and there certainly is an opportunity through strategic planning to have an effective resource utilization, to spend money wisely. We always want to make sure that we have measurable results. If we can't measure the results, then it's very difficult to determine if what we're doing is making any sense. So we want to make sure that our goals are always measurable. And certainly through the strategic planning process, we'll talk a little bit more about this just in a moment, but certainly there is an attempt for consensus building. Now, with the long-term financial plan that is of main interest today, there are certain outcomes that we can experience from this process. One certainly is to diminish the volatility of tax rates. If you plan and look at what the gaps may be financially, you may see that there is some spiking or a lot of volatility in the tax rate that will occur over the next 3 to 5, 10 years, whatever your long-term plan is. And so one of the outcomes can be that we can attempt to smooth out any sort of fluctuations in the tax rate by going through the process. Again, another benefit of the long-term financial plan is that we can possibly sustain fiscal cycles. Now, that means that whether we are in a growth situation, if your school district has an enrollment increase and you can project that out and you're in a strategy of growth, then long-term financial planning will help you sustain that cycle that you're in. You're in the cycle of a growth strategy. Or if your district is experiencing a lack of enrollment or reduction in resources of some sort, and you have a retrenchment strategy, then long-range planning can help you with that type of fiscal cycle also. So it's good to do financial planning, long-term financial planning, no matter what cycle you may be in with your school district. And again, with strategic planning, a good long-term financial plan will help build consensus. There certainly will be people involved, a lot of people involved in the process. And another good possibility, the good benefit that could come from this, the long-term financial planning, is improving your bond rating. Certainly, if any of you have been through the process of trying to get your bond ratings improved or increased, you know that when you're having that meeting or that interview with Moody's, for instance, Moody's will want to see that you have a long-term financial plan in effect and that you go through that process. They look at several aspects of the organization, but certainly one is good fiscal management, and long-term financial planning to them certainly does fit that. And if you can show that you've planned out and you've made arrangements for long-term financial viability of your organization, of your school, then that goes a long way in helping you increase your bond rating. Now, a strategic plan is not a budget. I think we've probably mentioned that enough as we've talked already. It's certainly not a way to fix an operation or a process. Again, that's more of a shorter-term approach to solving an issue. You may have some short-term issues in your transportation area or maybe school lunch or in your business office. Those are all rather short-term. Strategic planning is really, and long-term financial planning is concerned, again, with longer-term issues, and as the name implies, more of a strategic approach rather than short-range or operational approach. And it's certainly not something you do once and it's done. As strategic planning and long-term financial planning are continuous processes, and you have to continue to update and to look at the long-term plan. You need to look at, and as new information becomes available, you factor that information in, and so it's a dynamic plan also. And you need to know that you can't just do it and put it on the shelf and it's done. It has to be updated continually. Now, one of the plans or concepts in strategic plans that also fit with long-term financial planning is what's called the environmental scan, a very important part of doing any sort of long-term planning. And one aspect of it is to look at the external factors that are affecting your organization. And those external factors certainly would be national trends. There would be local trends. There would be, for instance, the economy. There's certainly an external factor locally and nationally that are affecting our schools right now. And we have to look for opportunities and threats, and they can be many to the school district. For instance, an external threat, depending on your school district, maybe charter schools or maybe alternatives to public education. And so they may be threats that you need to take into account. But you need to go through this process of thinking about what these threats are, what these opportunities are also. There may be opportunities to take advantage. And you do the same thing not only externally but internally by looking on the inside of the organization and trying to factor in what are some of the strengths and weaknesses. Maybe you have a great parent-teacher organization. That certainly would be a strength. Maybe the administration and the Board of Education get along very well, and that certainly would be a strength. So you need to go through, for your long-term plans, financial and strategic, you need to go through and look at these environments and try to make some sort of evaluation about where you stand. Now, why do we do this? Well, we want to provide healthy financial condition. This helps us to look at our districts and provide a healthy financial condition. And what good is that to us? Well, it provides certainly stability and continuity of operations. By looking at the financial health, we certainly will determine what the operations hold for the future. At least we'll forecast what they hold, and we'll be able to make corrections if necessary. It obviously would show us, and what we're trying to attempt to do is to provide resources for students to achieve in the future. By going through the financial planning, the long-term planning, it also adds credibility to taxpayers. Taxpayers would be more inclined to support the schools if they see that there is good fiscal management occurring. And I would take that a step beyond and say not only taxpayers, but all stakeholders. I think it's certainly anybody involved in the school community finds it helps with their credibility, helps the credibility of the school by having a long-term plan and a process in place. And then certainly it helps to recruit and retain staff. Many people are reluctant if they know that there's financial difficulties occurring in the school to come to work for the school. So it helps in that regard. It tells us by having a healthy financial condition that we have enough money to pay all of the vendor invoices that filter through the business office, and that certainly is very important. It gives us better access to financial markets when we need to borrow long-term for capital projects and also short-term. Certainly, if your financial condition is weak, you will have less access to the financial markets than if you have a good or healthy financial condition. And it certainly, through this process, helps to gauge fiscal stress. And there is fiscal stress in many school districts today just because of the nature of the economy and some of the other aspects and things that are occurring certainly has created some stress in fiscal stress, certainly in the financial condition of the school district. And so those are all things that by having a healthy financial condition, hopefully you can address if necessary. Now, the Government Finance Officer Association has a four-phase approach to long-term planning. And you'll notice the main topics: mobilization, analysis, decision, and execution. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about those in just a minute. But usually with mobilization, the first thing, that's just who is going to be a part of this long-range planning? Who's going to be part of putting together the long-term financial plan? Sometimes it is created, sometimes the impetus there is a crisis, but doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's just to stabilize the funds. But certainly, I know from experience, I was started a job, and the district was faced with a $10 million deficit, and certainly the mobilization there was to stabilize the funds and erase the deficit and get into a positive situation, which the district was able to do through a planning process. And a lot of people were involved in that, and thankfully, even to this day, they're experiencing a healthy financial situation. But the impetus does not necessarily and you shouldn't wait for a crisis to occur. You want to go ahead and go through the planning process all the time. You want to begin immediately. The analysis is probably most known to us in the school business field, and that is the looking at the revenues and expenditures, and from that determining what the fund balance will be as we project for the future. And once we determine if we have an imbalance in our revenue and expenditures long term, then there is the decision tree that has to be taken into account. How are we going to achieve the fiscal balance? And then obviously once that's determined, then there's a lot of people that need to be involved in the execution or making that occur so that the balance can be put back into the finances. Now this slide shows you some of the main parts of the government finance officer's long-term financial planning. You'll notice on the right are the four phases that I just talked about, and then in the middle are some additional details. In just a moment, I hope to show you how this process or this long-term financial planning picture, if you will, fits in very nicely with strategic planning and how they go hand in hand and how some of the concepts fit into both. So you'll notice here this is a little bit more detailed than what I've given you, although we'll have some in just a moment. But again, we want to draw the parallel with the long-term financial planning and strategic planning. And I think I've shown you the next slide, but just for sake of review, the strategic planning process begins by involvement of many stakeholders. You need to involve teachers, administrators, you need to involve the public, the naysayers, as well as those that support the school district. There has to be a lot of people involved. It's a huge process and can take months, but it is a necessary process, and I believe it has benefits, certainly when coupled with long-term financial planning. And through this process, the district will come up with a mission, which gives identity and purpose to what you're all about and what your school district is about. You will also set parameters, limitations, and boundaries, things that you're not. Maybe your mission will be that you want to concentrate on pre-K to 12. Maybe you'll want to be pre-K to some community education, whatever. But you will define your mission and you will limit what you're not by your parameters. And then, as we just talked about, for internal analysis and external analysis, you need to go through the SWOT process, as it's called, looking at your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, and look at that and try to determine where the problems may lie for the future, and internally and externally. And then once you've gone through that, you need to commit to measurable results. It may be increased student achievement or scores on a certain standardized exam by 10%. It may be to achieve financial, you may want to have good finances. You may be in a deficit, and you may want to change that or turn it around. And so there could be all sorts of objectives that you would define in your plan. And then the strategies. How are you going to achieve that? And those strategies then become action plans. And it's always good to take the action plan to the level of employee that can actually make it happen. So if you're talking about education of students, you need to have teachers involved in a big way because obviously they're very involved in the education of our students. And if there's something to do with the finances, then by all means involve the people that are closest to it. Never leave out the principals. I think you'll find that principals serve a role in the school district which gives them access to the public in a closer way, and also they have not only the ear of the public but teachers also. So it's very important to involve them. And as we mentioned, with every plan, you need to evaluate and update on a continual basis. So this is the chart that I've come up with to try to look at the government finance officer's financial planning approach, mobilization, decision-making, the analysis, and then the execution, and trying to show where the strategic planning concepts fall in. So you'll notice under mobilization, and again, these are really on a continuum. They're not hard, fast, defined, so you may find some of the concepts could overlap. But basically, as you define your beliefs and mission and parameters and strategic planning, that will be the piece that will be the mobilization for your long-term plan. And as you go through your SWOT analysis, the strengths and weaknesses, again, obviously that's your analysis piece, and that for long-term financial planning. And then as you look at objectives and strategies, that will be the decision-making once you find out what the analysis is. And then the execution will be the action plans, evaluation, and the update. So again, the attempt here is to show that there is this correlation between strategic planning and what happens in financial planning. And they can't be done in a vacuum. One goes hand in hand with the other. And you need to get involved in this. Certainly as the school business official, you probably are in the best position to see how these planning processes interrelate more so than anyone else in the school district, because you obviously are involved in many aspects and see the big picture. So I think we need to take a leadership role in that respect in attempting to demonstrate to our school districts that we need to look at not only strategic planning or some planning and the long-term financial plan. So that hopefully will show you how the two are integrated. Now, some of the key players in strategic planning and long-term planning I've listed here. They're probably somewhat obvious, but certainly the Board of Education needs to be involved. They are the policy-making board, and certainly they need to be a part of that process. The superintendent is charged with carrying out the responsibility of the Board of Education policies, and certainly he or she would have to be involved. And I've taken on the school business official, or if you were looking at another governmental agency, it might be chief financial officer. But I've tried to come up here with a little bit of more information for you. The school business official in this process needs to balance educational needs of students with the tax burden. And you need to try to optimize the value added to the community by going through a long-term financial plan and developing sustainability, resiliency of your organization. And again, I think that school business officials are in a unique position where hopefully they can see how these are interrelated and take the leadership role on in your school district as far as making some of these, attempting to make some of these opportunities occur. You certainly understand the tax burden. You, I'm sure, understand the educational needs of students. I think it's just a natural fit that is where the school business official's role lies in this whole huge planning process. And then we can go on. Certainly other district-level administrators need to be involved. Again, I have put down here principals, a very important player in all of this planning. Teachers, support staff, and of course, you need to involve parents too. I apologize for the way this looks. I copied it off the web, and I can see it didn't turn out very well from what I can see. But my only point here is to give you an example of a policy that is out there. This happens to be Marcus Whitman Central School. I found it out on the web. They have their policies out there. And the piece highlighted in red merely speaks to, again, a policy of the district. The district has a long-term plan for both capital projects and operating expenses. It is so very important to make sure that someplace in your policy, the Board of Education institutionalizes long-term financial planning. It will certainly give you, as a school business official, the authorization, the authority to go forward and spend your time putting together this very important plan. So I just use this as an example. I'm sure there are others out there. Maybe you already have that in your policy manual. But if you don't, the next time there's an opportunity, you may want to make sure, or you want to suggest that there be something put in the plan, the policy booklet, that indicates that long-term financial planning is going to occur in your school district, again, because we have hopefully seen the value of planning. Now, the elements of a long-term financial plan, typically 5 to 10 years. I know there would be some that would say, well, you can't really, it's a waste of time to do it for that length of time. And I don't think it's a waste of time. Certainly understood that the value, the accuracy that you can have 10 years out is certainly not there. But I think it's an attempt to look at and to bring the parties together to have a discussion about what the possibilities are. And you may, rather than having one plan, you may have a series of plans. You may have scenario 1, 2, 3, whatever. And if this were to occur, this is what things look like. So the 5 to 10 years seems to be what most of the Comptroller's Office, the Government Finance Officers Association seems to be thinking is a good term. Maybe you could lessen it to 3, but 5 to 10 is probably a good average. Typically, you'll highlight the general fund because that is what the voters are most concerned about and where it's the largest fund, obviously. But you don't want to leave out the other funds. You want to take time, obviously not as much time maybe, but you also want to do planning on your other funds as well. Don't just leave it at the general fund because, as we know, there are certain accounts that are interrelated between funds, among funds, and so we need to make sure that we take all that into account. And so I would encourage you to not only look at the general fund, but take into account some of the other smaller ones. You should update the plan as needed. I think you should look at it on a regular basis. As new information becomes available, you should be updating your long-term financial plan. You need to include revenues and expenditures, of course, but also there has to be a plan for capital, whether it be buses, buildings, renovations, or debt. How much debt are you going to be paying? And certainly now technology is can be a huge amount of money in the school district. You need to incorporate all of these. We'll take a look at this in a little bit. But you need to incorporate all of these aspects into your financial plan. And then lastly, you need to make sure that you include and communicate with all stakeholders exactly what this plan is. You need to include them in the process. It wouldn't be unheard of, and I certainly would think, and maybe hopefully you will agree, that you should include people that are closest to the situation. For instance, if you have you want to try to look at your long-term financial plan for transportation, you need to include the transportation director, and maybe he or she would include some of the people that are involved in his or her department. And so I think you can't include people too much. It gives you buy-in. It gives everybody an idea of what the situation is. And again, it is time-consuming, but it is a very important aspect of maintaining the finances of your school district. Now, I have put the next few slides here. As you know, the state has gone through and come up with a certification for school business officials, which is the SDBL, School District Business Leader. That's the certification that's out there. There's certain educational requirements, et cetera. And my point in putting these here is because I wanted to emphasize and show you that in the latest information from the State Education Department, this is the information, these are the frameworks that the state is saying we as school business officials need to know. And all of these include planning in one way or the other. The first one I have here is demonstrating knowledge of school district budget process, including planning. And so, again, the emphasis here on this new certification and what school business officials are expected to know and do, in this case, again, is based on planning. There's also understand a comprehensive, multi-year strategic planning, and it goes on to give examples of that. But once again, we as school business officials are required to understand and know comprehensive, multi-year strategic planning. This is the latest information from the state as to what the expectations are. And it goes on to say here that multi-year facilities plans, which we'll talk a little bit about, based on projections, programmatic needs. These are all things that the state is saying we as school business officials need to be involved with and need to understand. And so it's important that we begin this process of long-term planning. And then the next one just indicates more about construction from planning to completion. In other words, again, we're expected to be able to lead this process of planning for the school district to get to a long-term plan. And again, this is the last one, but it says here that the business leader understands strategic planning and allocates resources to help build a school system that will endure. And again, this concept of endurance is also sustainability and resiliency are the real management words that are out there now. More resiliency now than sustainability. And I have a short definition coming up on that. And then the last thing, just to get us focused on school business, is that, as you may know, New York State ASBO has a task force that is looking at the future of our profession. And with that, they have listed here some of the ideas and concepts that we as school business officials in our profession will face. And if you can go through this on your own. I just wanted to call it to your attention. But you'll notice here the ideas and things that we are being asked to be concerned about, and certainly long-term planning fits in. But I'll leave that for you to look at later on. Long-term financial planning. Let's make a distinction. Multi-year budgeting authorizes expenditures for more than 1 year. So if you were an entity that was involved with multi-year budgeting, you would be authorizing those. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about multi-year financial planning, which illustrates the ability to provide services for the future based on a set of assumptions that you make as a school business officials and others involved that would help you make those assumptions. So we're talking about a plan. It's a look at where the district will be. It is not an authorization. And again, it needs to be constantly updated as you go through the process. Again, the general principles of financial planning, and this one I have 3 years instead of, in this case for historical trending, you would look at 3 to 5 years is usually the norm. Look at some historical data and for the past 3 to 5 years to try to make some prediction for the future. Always be conservative. I don't think you can go wrong if you're conservative in your forecast or projections. Certainly, the worst case scenarios are probably better than the best case because you want to look at where you might be and where the gaps may occur, where things may occur that need attending to. So better to tend to something, at least have a discussion about it, and maybe if it doesn't materialize in the future, great. But it would be a shame to go through this whole process and not be conservative and miss a gap that may occur. So try to be conservative, I think, is the best approach. You should focus on the volatile and the large items. Don't worry about the small things. There's no way you can predict the number of pencils in the future, but you can certainly look at it in a larger sense of student supplies. And obviously that might be based on the number of students that you are going to project for the future. So focus on those things that are most volatile, the large items, and don't worry so much about the smaller items in trying to get a degree of accuracy there. Don't use complex formulas. It really doesn't make sense to try to look at state aid and run through numbers, although it might be a good exercise to do that, run it through the formulas, because they could change. The best I think you can do, and we'll look at this in a little more detail later on, is look at some of the forecasts that are out there for state aid as far as the Division of Budget, the Governor's Office, the Assembly puts out long-term plans. See what they're saying their predictions are for the future. I think that's probably the best information you can begin with. Again, you start with that information. If you have different new information, you certainly have to factor in things that you're finding that may occur in your district. But certainly that's a good place to start, rather than trying to throw all this information into a formula and predict it for the next 5 to 10 years. Choose a level of detail that you feel comfortable with. Typically in school business, we always talk about, and I think it's still out there, but it's the SBM1, which was the budget format before we became computerized and had some changes in budget approach. But that is the SBM1 or ST3 format that I think we're all familiar with. That might be the level. It might be even for projecting for the future may even be too detailed, and you may want to begin with that, but take it down to a lesser level of detail, maybe even to general support, instruction, and that level. Ensure that you have included all of the expenditures and revenues. Try not to leave anything out. Try to be as inclusive as you can. Determine and list your assumptions. If you say and predict or forecast that state aid will increase by 4.7% over the next 2 years, then you need to make sure you stipulate that, and that those people that are looking at your plan understand what your assumptions are. Again, our methodologies for calculating these numbers are pretty straightforward, and I think it's true of the finance world in general, in the private sector and public. It's our assumptions that make the difference. So make sure you define and let everybody know what your assumptions are. And then you want to project. I think it's good to begin by the object. In other words, you look at the salaries, the fringe benefits, you look at supplies, and do a projection on a large scale. But then go back and try to project on a functional basis by the superintendent's office, by the regular education, by special ed, and see if there is a variance. And then try to work through what your forecast may be, your long-term plan may be for the future. But do it both ways and attempt to see if anything highlights itself when you look at it from one aspect, one angle to the other. And then again, as with strategic planning, again, the process here for long-term planning, seek input from many sources, the division of budget, your principals, your teachers, others out there. I have a list at the end here of the presentation that may help you, certainly the comptroller's website, many sources out there. Involve and look at many sources. Now, to project expenditures, which is usually what we focus on, and revenues, you have to look at salaries. Now, salaries sometimes can be very easy to project if you have settled contracts. But what if you don't? What if you don't? If your bargaining units haven't settled, then you're going to have to make some educated guesses as to what that amount of increase should be. And there are various ways of doing that based on other settlements or historic information. But you need to take a careful look at that and project accordingly. Fringe benefits usually fall from your salaries, with the exception, of course, of if you're self-funded in some areas. They really have no bearing necessarily on salaries. Health care, if you're self-funded in that regard, then it's based on the claims. You may need to involve some expert opinion in that to help you forecast what that may be. And two of the big areas, again, healthcare being one, but pension costs, as we know, continue to rise, and it is going to be a huge chore to try to project what that may be. The best information that is out there right now is to anticipate that there will be increases in pension costs for the near future and for the future to come. And I do have some other information on that. Enrollments, you need to look at the statistical approach, the cohort survival technique and then modify that based on what you know is occurring in your school district. Supplies can usually be based on the number of students and enrollment, number of teachers, debt. If you have debt that's been issued, then you certainly have amortization schedules, and you can use those schedules to help you with your long-term financial plan. But you may be anticipating debt, and so you want to be conservative in what your cost might be in the future, and you need to look at and try to understand what your needs may be. Utilities are very difficult to predict. On the next slide, I have some information that may be helpful. Special education, we know how expensive that can be with just one or two students showing up that are unexpected. And again, you just need, your BOCES can help you with this sometimes. There's certainly reports that they have to do to try to project the long-term needs for special education. And then equipment, again, if you have done your capital budgeting and you've done your technology plan, then that will help you to come up with some of the information that you might need for equipment. This slide shows you as far as, and it's just an example that I wanted to show you. This is from the, I believe it's called the World Energy Outlook Foundation that's out there on the web. But you can see how different types of fuels are going to increase from now until this goes up to 2030. You could maybe get an estimate then, again, factoring in other information from this as to what the cost would be. Again, I think you should try to base your information on the best sources that you have available to you. With the revenue projection, as I think I mentioned earlier, if you look at the division of budget, certainly you can get some clue for the next few years of what the governor's office is saying they think state aid will cost. And again, as a starting point, look at those. They're readily available on the Division of Budget website. That's a good starting point, and then you obviously have to fine-tune that to your district. With property taxes, usually that's what's left over after the other revenues and expenditures, but also be concerned about the housing market and its slowdown and foreclosures and what that will mean for assessments, because now most of the market value of some of these homes are no longer there. Therefore, people are grieving their assessments, saying my house is not worth it, and so that will have an impact on your property taxes for the future, along with your payment in lieu of taxes, and certainly whatever might happen in STAR. And local revenues, again, typically are not a huge part of the total pie of revenues, but try to come up with an estimate, a conservative estimate as far as your local revenues. The next slide here is, I don't think I can get to this, but if you look at the New York State Office of the State Comptroller, they have a long-term planning section on their website. They have a template there that you can use to actually fill in numbers. You can either save it or you can print it. I would suggest you go there and take a look at that and maybe even run it off if you haven't already done so. And it may be very helpful to you in putting together your long-term plan. Now, once you have done your long-term plan, you're going to come up with the difference between expenditures and revenues, and that will be your gap or what you need to deal with, and that will be your operating deficit or surplus. Then you can use that to try to look at what fund equity will be for the future, and if there is an imbalance, and then you need to take action. And as we talked about in the other webinar, Managing the Budget, there are certain strategies that you can use to fill the gap. And these are mostly from a book called Public School Budgeting by William Hartman. It's published by ASBO International. And he has a number of items out there that I'm sure most of you have been involved with in one time or another if you put together budgets. But these are some ideas that I'll let you look at. Again, I have these in one of the other presentations. It begins with reducing costs and then improving efficiencies. Then there's a slide on some ideas on increasing revenues, and then some other realignment of program options that you may want to take a look at. And then the last slide that I do want to just mention some things about is the strategic initiatives. And this is really when you get to the point like I faced when I went into a school district where there was a $10 million deficit. These are, when you get to that point, you're looking at some very tough measures that need to be taken to get the school district back online. But certainly, you need to look at assistance from the federal government, the state, your legislators, and maybe special legislation. You need to sell off assets that you no longer are using or can get rid of without too much of a problem, close facilities. Another drastic measure, strategic initiative, may be to defer compensation for a period of time. Sometimes if you are involved in a deficit situation, the state education department will allow you to make accounting modifications. Again, in this school district, we were allowed to recognize a certain amount of lottery aid in advance of receiving it. It was special information, special things that we were allowed to do to help ward off this deficit and get us into a position where we could start managing the district for surpluses and to get it out of the deficit. You need to plan a system of reserves, and we have that listed here. But certainly the reserves need to be built up. It may mean if you're in real bad condition, that you may have to increase your taxes. That may occur. And you may have to seek an austerity type of budget approach. That doesn't necessarily mean contingency. Some people use those words interchangeably. They should not. When I'm speaking austerity, I'm talking bare bones budget, cutting the budget and cutting programs. But if you get to the point of deficit, these strategic initiatives are absolutely essential to get out of that situation. Now, as I mentioned, the buzzwords these days in the management field, sustainability, which the best definition I could find, needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that has been really the approach that we've looked at in school districts too, I think. But now, with things occurring, with the financial situation the way it is, I think we're really into a situation of trying to be and develop a resilient organization, one that is capable of withstanding shock. And some of the things we've talked about through long-term planning will help you, I believe, and your districts to be adaptive, flexible, thriving organizations as for the future. And then there's certain things that need to occur in order to have a resilient organization. And this is put together by Shane Kavanaugh, again, at the Government Finance Officers Association, who writes much on long-term planning. And you can certainly go out to their website and get a lot of information. But certainly building that, one of the aspects is to look at decentralization to involve a lot of people. Sounds very much like strategic planning. To be transparent, to listen to others, to promote transparency in key areas. And then that's just a summary there. And then diversity, to avoid a single point of reliance. Make sure that that you have other funds set up, which we do in school districts, to reduce the burden on the general fund, if at all possible. And you need to seek out those people, even if they're naysayers, that will support what you're doing in long-term planning. You need to develop redundancy, which is avoiding a single path of rescue. Certainly you want to maintain a set of reserves. And again, as we talked about earlier, institutionalize long-term planning and pursue multiple strategies for financial health. Collaboration is absolutely imperative. You need to keep your board absolutely involved in anything that is going on. They need to have buy-in into this whole process. And if something should occur, mistakes happen, certainly you want to gracefully accept any mistakes that occur and not try to be too defensive, but just accept it. It is a part of the work that we do, especially in long-term planning. It's really not mistakes. The estimation might have been off in one respect or another. Flexibility, you got to understand that in today's economy, we're probably going to have issues. We can't expect, as we've seen, I think, typically over the last decades, stability. We're going to be faced with many hard decisions, and certainly long-term planning can help you ward off or at least be ready for this, and don't expect stability. And the next thing is try to think about what could occur in the future, have foresight, and think and prepare for the worst-case scenarios. Now, there's a whole section, and again, I don't have to go through all this because you have it, but we need to not only look at our long-term plan, but we need to also try to make some judgments about capital assets. We are required to do that by Commissioner Regulation 155.1, which talks about a 5-year capital plan, and we are also, by 155.4, required to come up with a maintenance plan. So I would encourage you to look at those regulations, 155.1 and 155.4. You're already required to do that. Certainly facilities planning of the state education department will tell you when it's required for your district. But these are a good basis for putting together your long-term financial plan. And again, you need to take into account some of the obvious things, but needs and costs. Certainly a big item with capital planning is to prioritize. And on the next slide, I'll show you some of the ways that you can do that, or some of the aspects of prioritization. There it is. Certainly health and safety are the biggest issues. Anything that's legally required, you need to make sure you take care of first, and that's like any ADA requirements that are out there. There may be environmental issues. If you do a capital project with removing stormwater from your property, which is a huge environmental issue, and you need to make provision for that. Certainly, if there's a benefit to your district, if you're facing enrollment increase or decrease, that is certainly a priority that needs to be taken into account. And then the feasibility of the project, how much time, what's the cost, can we actually do this? Have we already exceeded our debt capacity? And then, of course, you want to always be concerned with, and that goes really with health and safety, about the risk involved in any sort of project that you would undertake. Capital projects can be thought of in terms of a future stream of income, is what I have here, but really a stream of future benefit. And because of that, typically the financing of capital projects is done by way of a bond issue. There are other ways to do that, finance a project, but the bonding is thought, not only does it allow you to raise a large amount of money in a short period of time, but it also extends the cost of the project to future generations who will be benefiting from the project. And that is thought to be something that is not a bad thing. That is a good thing. That let future generations that will be using the capital project that will be using that to help pay for it. There are certain things that you have to submit to the facilities planning department that will help you with your long-term plan. I have them listed here: your fire inspection reports, building condition survey, a HERA reports. Again, you can find all of these listed out on the facilities planning website. I would encourage you to look at that and become familiar with these if you don't know them, and incorporate them into your project. Again, just as with strategic planning and long-term planning, if you have a capital project you're involved with, you need to develop a team, look at all sorts of aspects, environmental aspects, internal and external. Certainly you'll need an architect on board, and you need to develop a team to help you with that. The only exceptions that you have to voter approval, and you can get that by way of a budget vote or special vote, are the items I had here. If you have an insurance recovery, you don't need a voter approval. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, and I put here, is the emergency. What you may consider, you and I may consider as an emergency, is sometimes not considered an emergency at facilities planning. And again, if it's something that has to be unforeseen, immediate correction, and not from neglect. So if part of your roof leaks, that's probably not an emergency if you haven't replaced your roof in over 30 years. So just be aware that you need to check with facilities planning if you think you have an emergency. Call them immediately, and they'll help you through the process. With capital planning, along with long-term planning, always be sure that you don't miss out on some of the other spaces that may be needed in the area of storage and restrooms and those ancillary or auxiliary spaces, in addition to the instructional space. Very often you can incorporate that into your plan, and you want to make sure that buildings usually last 15 to 30 years, and you want to make sure that everything is covered in your plan. And the thing that I want to mention on this slide mostly is to call your attention to the legal constraints, the debt ceilings. You probably know that you are constrained on your capital planning in the things that you can do based on whether you are a small city school district or centralized school district. And all these other things just remind you to take into account the expenditures and obviously what your cash flow needs will be, your funding, again, your sustainability of financing, can you pay for it in the future, and what will the tax rate, what will the burden be for the taxpayers. So you need to just remember these as you go through and do your capital plans. They can be financed by way of the budget, by bond anticipation notes, again, by bonding. There's certain projects you can lease, and certainly you can establish a capital reserve. These are just methods of financing. You can attempt to, along with your capital planning, that will develop into what your debt will be for the future. And what you need to do is look at your debt and plan that for the future and incorporate that in your capital, in your long-term plan also, because you may have debt falling off at a certain year, certain bond issue is completely paid, and therefore that may be an opportune time to incur additional debt without it affecting your long-term plan. And next, I just have here for your reference the reminder on debt limit. Again, attempt to synthesize and bring together for you information, but you need to understand the difference if you're a small city versus a central school district, what your debt limits are based on, and they are different depending on your type of school. This is an example assuming the same full value for a small city and central. You can see that the small city has the ability to contract for $41 million in this example. The same size, property value-wise, central school has $126 million. So there is a limit as to what you can do, and you need to recognize that. Now, on technology planning, again, I would submit to you that you're required to do a technology plan for a number of good reasons, but based on Commissioner Regulation 100.11, which is there for your review, you need to be concerned about the total cost of technology when you're planning, not just the equipment cost, but make sure you take into account training, what it takes to set up the equipment, software, et cetera. And there are a number of ways that technology can be funded. And I've listed several items here for your review. You can do it by way of capital project, and there are certain restrictions. You can also do it by way of operating budgets and software aid, hardware aid, and I've included some information with the presentation that will guide you as to what you can and can't do as far as financing and funding your technology as you go forward and plan accordingly. So again, I've included these things, and you can look at them when you have some time. Hopefully they'll be very helpful. Nothing here isn't anything that isn't out on the website, and you can take a look at that. Another thing I want to mention is planning for retirement costs. And again, you can certainly use your reserve account. There is a reserve account for retirement planning, but that's only for the employee's retirement system. It does not pertain to the teacher's retirement system. And the other thing is that Chapter 57 of the laws of 2010 has a provision in there for a stabilization program. If you're not familiar with that, you may want to look at the New York State Comptroller's website and get information about that. It was not included as an option in the latest mailing from their office that shows you what your retirement costs will be. But it is out there now on their website. If you want to try to reduce your costs over the next several years, there is a plan that is available and may fit. So I just bring that to your attention. You certainly need to be concerned about the GASB 45, which we've all been through. At this point, there's no funding that needs to be done of that huge amount of money, but certainly as you go forward, you might want to be concerned about and think about if at some point school districts will be asked to fund or put aside money for that liability. So when you negotiate, make sure you take into account some of these long-term items that, what's it going to cost at retirement? Because that may be a bigger factor for you than it is right now. And again, some information here about reserves, which we've included in other presentations, and it's there again for you to use and to refer to. This is the policy that is suggested for reserve accounts, and that's put out there by the New York State Education Department. and so you want to make sure that your accounting policy at least mentions about fund balance and how you're going to look at that. And then what is the importance of fund balance? I think we all know that it certainly can help us to smooth out the tax rate increases over the years. It certainly helps with our credit rating. Again, Moody's, if you have a fund balance, is very impressed with that, more so than if you don't. It is certainly a factor to be concerned about as you are doing your long-term planning. And there are a host of other reasons. It only makes good sense to plan your fund balance, and it goes hand in hand with the way that you do your long-term financial plans as well. And as you know, there are certain restrictions on the unreserved fund balance, the unappropriated fund balance, and and there are restrictions on the reserve accounts. I've listed the reserve accounts for you, and you can go through and note the ones that are most flexible. For instance, you'll note here that it says this reserve for workers' compensation can be established by board and is funded by budgetary appropriations. Very flexible, doesn't require voter approval. Unemployment reserve account, again, it says it's established by board action and is funded by budgetary appropriations, another flexible account. Repair reserve used to be very flexible, but now there's a requirement that voter approval is required to fund this reserve, and a public hearing is needed to expend funds from it. So it's not quite as flexible as it was in the past. The capital reserve requires voter approval to establish it and to make payments and to fund it. So it's a very restricted type of reserve where there's not a lot of flexibility built into it. The insurance reserve is funded by budgetary appropriations. It is limited to 5% of the annual budget. So there is no limit to what you can accumulate, but it is limited per year to 5% of your budget. Very flexible type of reserve that could be used. And then the property loss and liability reserve, it may not exceed 3% of the annual budget or $15,000, whichever is greater. So you can take 3% of your budget if it's more than 15, and you can put that money in there to help the district in the future. Debt service is a special type of reserve account. When you sell property that has been financed and you still need to pay off some of that financing, you can have a debt service reserve. The tax reduction, again, if you sell property, rather than recognize that income in 1 year, you can put it in this reserve for a period of 10 years and use a little bit to write down the tax levy if you so choose over the course of 10 years. And then the tax certiorari established and expended the reserve. It does not require voter approval. There are certain restrictions to how much you can put in there or have there, but it is quite a flexible type of account. And the one I mentioned earlier, the retirement reserve, is for the employee's retirement system only, and the employee benefit accrued liability is established by the board, very flexible, and would help you to accumulate funds to pay off employee contracts in the future. And then we get into cash flow, which again is pretty much what I've discussed as far as the long-term financial plan. And just reminders here on some of the objectives and certain legal requirements that you can use, and some of the borrowing tools and how you can improve your cash. These are references that I've used throughout the presentation. There are others, but I would encourage you to consider them. And then we're back again to our original diagram, which indicates the interrelatedness of the budget with long-term plan, the strategic plan, the capital plan, and your technology plan. So that's the presentation on long-term planning. Again, I encourage you to make sure that you get involved in that if you haven't already been involved in it. And I'll hand this back to Matthew. Matthew?
Thanks, Mike. We have two questions, one from Victor Manuel. How realistic can a long-range financial plan be when state aid, being the second largest revenue component for any district, is often an unknown even in your short-term operational budget, let alone your long-term plan? Also, won't a potential tax cap completely change the results of your long-range financial plan and how you devise your plan going forward?
Well, I think that if I understand the questions, the first question has to do with the state aid. And again, you're not going to be able to come up with a good, accurate prediction. But I would encourage you to look at some of the forecasts that are out there from the Division of Budget and from the Assembly and the Senate, which have actually forecast what they think state aid cost will be in the future. Now, granted, that's a good starting point, because if that's what they're thinking, then chances are there might be somebody else thinking that as far as the politicians. So I would look at what is being already put out there by the people that come up with the state aid plans, and at least as a starting point. And again, I would encourage you to always be conservative in your long-term estimates. And then if I understand the second one is about the tax cap, right now what's out there is a couple of plans that would limit the tax to 4% or to 2%. Really, we have limits right now on certain things as far as the expenditure side with the contingency budget. If the budget goes down, this would move from the expenditure side to the levy side. But I think part of the comprehensive plan would be to look at where you would end up based on your forecasts, and then look where that gap is between what the cap would do and where you're going to be. And then that becomes the basis for the discussion with a much larger stakeholder group as to where we go from here. What is our plan? I think that's the best you can do. We live in uncertain times, and it is difficult, but at least the process is there, and I think that'll help.
Okay, thank you. We have one final question from Carol Lasala. Retirement contribution reserve is for future contributions for ERS payments, not April, May, and June. April, May, and June will be recorded in a liability account due to ERS. I guess that's more of a statement than a question. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, the reserve account for the retirement would be monies for the employee's retirement system. The money that goes in there would be for April, May, and June. That isn't money that you're going to be paying out in the next fiscal year. That will be over the 1-year requirement. So that's why that reserve would be used for those funds. Now, I would suggest, too, if you're using that reserve account, be conservative. And, you can be conservative in two ways, depending on what meets your needs. You can either overestimate or underestimate. And I would say being conservative sometimes means overestimating your expenditures. But that's what that reserve is used for and set up for.
Okay, thank you very much. We do not have any other questions in the chat window, so I'd like to thank you all for attending today's webinar, and thank you, Mike, for presenting today. The basic budgeting webinar has been rescheduled for for November 15th, 2010 at 2 p.m. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at mdarius@nysasbo.org. Thank you all very much and have a great day.
This conference has not started or has been paused by the moderator. You will be placed on music hold until the conference begins.